Okay, so I'm just going to get started here. Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Kathleen Wong, and I'm from TGO Consulting, and I'm pleased to have Liz Pateo here with me today. She is the VP of Business Development for Fastpath, which is one of our Dynamics GP partners. She has over 15 years of experience specializing in business process mapping, security, and configuration. So she's here today to review some security and audit challenges in Dynamics GP and how to solve them. So before we get started, just a little bit of housekeeping items. Your phones are going to be on mute as to reduce any background noise, but if you do happen to have any questions during the session, please feel free to put them into the GoToMeeting interface, which is on the side of your screen, and then we'll get to answering any of them at the end of the presentation. So for the next 30 to 45 minutes or so, we'll introduce who TGO is and who Fastpath is. We'll review the challenges associated with security and audit compliance and how you can solve them with Fastpath's solution. And then, as I said, we'll go into a Q&A for anybody who has any questions. Okay, so for those of you who don't know who TGO is, we've been implementing financial systems for the past 27 years, specializing in ERP, business intelligence, business process management, and corporate performance management. In the ERP space, we have been a GP partner since 1994. And what sets us apart from other consulting companies is that we guarantee the success of our projects at a fixed fee. And we're always looking for ways to help our clients enhance their systems and improve their bottom lines with solutions like Fastpath. So without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Liz.
Great, thank you, Kathleen. Thank you everyone for joining the webinar. I know it's not always easy to carve out time out of your day. Everybody has busy schedules, so we truly appreciate you all being here with us. I'm going to start with an introduction about Fastpath, and then we're going to talk a little bit about, our products that we offer and the challenges that our products are meant to solve, and then we're going to get right into that Config AD demo to talk about, how you can sync your GP login with Active Directory and, the ease that comes with having that ability. So a little bit about Fastpath. We were founded in 2004. We're headquartered in Des Moines, Iowa, and although we're Microsoft Gold Competency ISV and ERP, all that means is that our staff is certified in the different Dynamics solutions. We actually don't do Dynamics GP implementations or consulting or anything like that. We really stick to just developing and supporting our suite of tools, and we leave, the ERP implementations to partners like TGO out there that are doing a much better job than we would, and we really try to specialize just in the security, audit, and compliance space. We have CPAs and certified internal auditors on staff to help us develop our tools, make sure we're following the latest accounting standards. We have over 1,000 customers with installs across 30 countries. The common challenges that we find when people are coming to us asking for solutions is the security setup in their ERP is not the greatest. Everybody's in admin. Maybe everybody has power user. Nobody is really set up with the proper security. They have challenges with user provisioning. Maybe, setting up users is challenging. They're logging in as SA to set up users. Too many people know the SA password. They're having issues even kind of keeping track of who's requesting to be set up as a user and, granting security, what security has been granted to users over time. It's hard to report on all of that information. Who has access to Dynamics? Just keeping track of who has access to the system and what kind of access they have. What they're doing with that access. GP does not have any inherent audit trail capabilities, so it's really hard to see changes that are being made to the system and who's making those changes. So we can help with that. Segregation of duties analysis is also another challenge that we find that we can assist with. A lot of times people have compliance and audit requirements, whether they're maybe need to be SOX compliant or there's FDA requirements, or maybe they're not for profit or there's some sort of government audit or compliance requirements needed for that organization. We can help meet those challenges, and so that's what we're kind of here to do, and that's what our products are tailored for. And so before we get into the Config AD tool, I would like to take a minute to kind of tell you a little bit more about the products that we offer for Dynamics GP, and then we'll get right into the product demo. And also, there's going to be plenty of time at the end for question and answers, so if there are any questions at all for any point in time, we can definitely take them as we're going through. If you don't want to wait to the end, you can do like Kathleen said and do the raise hand function, but we also will leave time at the end of the demo for questions and answers. So some of the tools that we have available for Dynamics GP are, we have our Assure tool. It's our risk-based security access review and segregation of duties analysis platform. Basically what our tool does is it tells you where all the potential risks are in your organization based on the access that you've granted to Dynamics GP. So for example, if a user has access to create a vendor and they have access to pay that vendor, technically that's a risk. Now, we don't stop that user from doing their job. It is not a preventive tool, but what it allows you to do as an organization is, one, determine if that security is appropriate for that user. If it's not, obviously you're going to go ahead and want to change that security. But if that security is indeed appropriate, then what it allows you to do is document what your compensating control is. Maybe you have a vendor review process, so even though this user can create vendors and make payments, maybe there's a process where the vendors are tracked and reviewed on a weekly or daily basis. Maybe all batches are posted by a manager only with a password or something like that. Whatever it is you do to kind of alleviate that risk in your organization, you can document that. So all of your controls are documented in one centralized location with very easy to read security reports, and that's what our Assure tool grants. Our Audit Trail tool allows you to have continuous monitoring that tracks all changes to critical data. You as an organization decide what's critical. For some users, it might be the inventory setup windows and things related to pricing and sales. For other users, it might be things related to the procurement and payment process, vendors, purchase orders, etc. For others, it could be combinations of all of that. You determine what's important to track in your organization, and you can track it at a very granular level. So if we're looking at tracking vendors, when we look at that vendor card in GP, there are quite a few fields on that vendor card. We don't need to track all of them. We don't really care if fax number changes. We never send faxes in our organization anymore, so we're not going to track that. We do care if maybe the vendor check name changes or that remit to address. So those are fields that we probably want to track. Okay, so you can actually pick and choose. The other nice thing about our tool is it actually comes with a number of pre-built reports and pre-built templates to get you set up in auditing very quickly and easily. We have a implementation time of hours and days, not weeks and months. And the other thing about our tool is it can actually tell you where the changes originated from. So if you have a change that happens in Dynamics GP, it will tell you that. Or if somebody logs into SQL and makes a change to your data via the database, maybe they write an update statement to a table, we can track that and tell you that the change actually came from SQL. Okay, so we can tell you that. The Audit View tool allows for report design, assignment, and scheduling of the reports that come out of Assure and Audit Trail, but it also allows you to build an internal audit calendar with responsibilities. So let's say you have users that are assigned to review the vendor change report on a weekly basis, and maybe they need to review the segregation of duties analysis reports on a quarterly basis, etc. You can set up that calendar with who should be responsible for those reviews, the time frame that they should be doing the reviews in, and you can track whether or not those reviews are being done. So if they're due, they're overdue, they were completed, or they're still incomplete, etc., you can track all of that with the Audit View tool. And then Config AD is the tool that we're going to talk about today, which is allowing you to maintain user provisioning in Active Directory instead of in Dynamics GP, allowing you to have that single sign-on tool for Dynamics GP, allowing you to use that Windows authentication to log in, etc. Identity Manager is an add-on for that. And that really stemmed from the fact that we had a lot of clients that are using Config AD and they absolutely love it. But what they came to us and they said was, hey, Fastpath, the Config AD tool is great, but what we have a little bit of an issue with is we're using the tool to go ahead and set up the users, and we can, keep track of certain information, such as, we can put some notes in there and things like that. But our auditors are really wanting to scrutinize the process of setting up a new user. Who's doing the approvals for this? Who's actually doing the requests? Are the requests being approved, or are people just kind of getting security willy-nilly, et cetera? And so what we've done is we've built a workflow tool around user requests. And so with the Identity Manager tool, you can actually log in and request access for either a new user or request an access change for an existing user. And it documents, who's making the request and what's being requested. And then you can set up rules as to who should be doing the approval. And it can be multiple levels of approvals, etc. It will get routed to the correct person. And once that's approved, it will then use the Config AD technology to actually create the users or change the user security in accordance to what was requested and what was approved. And so we have all of those reports that show who the requester was, who the approver was, if there was any kind of a rejection, any kind of notes added, etc. So it's just workflow for user provisioning. Okay. So at this point, we're going to move into the live demo. So I'm going to go ahead and minimize my I'm going to close my slideshow for right now, and then we'll go right back into it. Let me just make sure that when we get back into it, we'll be on the right slide. And so with the Config AD tool, okay, we offer two different ways of actually using the tool depending on what works best for the organization. So the very first way is actually directly right through Active Directory. We can allow you to actually provision users right through the Active Directory Users and Computers console. Now, in order to do this, this does require a schema extension to be installed to Active Directory. What that schema extension does is it simply adds a right-click menu item so that when you right-click on a user, you now have a new menu item that says Configure Dynamics User. And what that does is that calls our Config AD software. Okay. However, if you're sitting here saying, oh man, I probably should leave this demo right now because I'm a GP admin and I want to set up users, but there's no way that my IT team is going to give me access to Active Directory. I'm not going to have access to the domain controller. I'm not going to be able to use this. Don't fear, we have a solution for you. We have what we call the Config AD Desktop. The Config AD Desktop gives you the same exact functionality. There is nothing missing from this tool that you would find going through the Active Directory Users Computers console. The only thing is that you don't need access to Active Directory, does not require that schema extension to be installed, does not require you to have access to the domain controller. What this does is this simply reads from the domain. So if I have my domain in here and I hit find, it's going to return all of those users that exist on that domain. And it's only going to return the name, the logon name, and the description. We're not seeing any other information. We're not seeing what they have access to. We have no idea what their passwords are. We can't add a user to Active Directory with this tool. We can't delete a user from Active Directory with this tool. We can't modify a user in Active Directory with this tool. So we can't reset Active Directory passwords, nothing. Okay? And the only thing we can do is we can simply select a user just like you can from the ADUC and click on Configure Dynamics User. And once you do that, again, it's going to call the software in the same exact way. So when we call the software, the first thing that we get to is a connections window. So you see I have connections for a number of different ERPs because we do support multiple ERPs here at Fastpath. But if I had multiple GP environments, maybe I had a production environment and a test environment, I can certainly configure those here. We have the ability to add, edit, and delete connections at the very top right corner of this Manage Connections window. So I could add all of my GP environments here. And then I would connect to the environment that I would like to grant security to. Okay, in this instance, I only have one GP environment, so I'm going to go ahead and connect to that. I will authenticate. And once I do, I can now begin setting up access for a user. okay? And in this example, we're going to set up access for a brand new user, somebody that doesn't have GP access at all. But in a moment, I will talk about, for those of you on the line that are already GP clients that already have GP users set up, how you configure those current users. You don't need to recreate them at all, okay? And we'll talk about that in just a second. So David Beckham retired from soccer and has decided to come work at Fastpath. He's kind of taken a step down from his position, but we're glad to have him. So we're going to go ahead and create him as a user. And the way that that works is we actually still do have to create a SQL login for David Beckham. There's no getting around that. That is a Microsoft Dynamics GP requirement. So what we do is we actually just create the SQL user ID and the SQL password equal to the Windows user ID and the Windows password. And so in this instance, the Windows ID for David Beckham is dbeckham. So his SQL login is also going to become dbeckham. We don't know what his Windows password is. We don't care. It's just what he knows, that what his Windows password is, hopefully, and that will become his GP password as well, his SQL password. It will be transparent to him. So the way that we create this user is we click on this little icon. It's a yellow head with a green body. And when we go ahead and we click on that, it's going to ask us if we'd like to add a note regarding this change. So it is a self-auditing tool. So we can go ahead and say yes, and we can say, you know, David Beckham is a new hire starting, I don't even know what month we're in. Okay, July 21st, reporting to Nancy Smith. Okay, so we can put some notes in there. And so now the user has been created successfully. So David has now been created as a GP user. He still doesn't have access because we haven't given him access to companies and roles, but his user ID has been created. Okay. The very next step of the process is assigning a login type. We have 3 distinct login types, and these login types are set by user, not by organization. So every user in your organization can have their own login type depending on what works best. Single sign-on is what we consider true single sign-on. The user will authenticate to the environment where GP is installed, and it can be installed on their desktop. It can be installed on a terminal server, Citrix, any kind of thin client. They would authenticate to that environment. They would click on the GP icon. It would automatically push in their Windows user ID and their Windows password, and as long as in the time that it took them to log into whatever machine that GP was installed on and the time that they're opening up GP, nothing has happened to their Windows account and hasn't been locked in any way, they'll gain access to the software if they have access to the software. Okay, single sign-on password required just adds an additional layer of security. We see this being used in organizations where users are have fat client installs. They come into work in the morning, they log into their machine, and maybe they have access to confidential information such as payroll, and they walk away to get a cup of coffee. We don't want somebody to just be able to go over to their machine, double click on GP, gain access to GP, and run a smart list of all of the employees' salary and things like that. Okay, so they would have to know that user's Windows password to gain access to the system, so it makes it more secure. Okay, so that's single sign-on password required. They would have to enter their Windows password each time they were entering GP. And then the standard login type is going to be the least commonly used. The standard login type is for administrative type of users. So maybe I need to log in as myself. Okay, so maybe I'm going to use my Windows authentication to log in. Or maybe I need to log in as DynSA with the DynSA password, or as SA with the SA password. Okay, maybe there's a third-party product ISV installed that still requires the use of SA to do some configuration, and so I need to have that access. Then I would grant the standard login type to that type of person so that they have the ability to switch between either their Windows user ID and password or a SQL user ID and password. Okay, so we're going to go ahead. In this instance, for David Beckham, he's just going to be our AP clerk, and so we're going to give him single sign-on. Okay, So he's all set there. And if you're on GP 2013 or higher, you now also have the ability to set the status of the user, whether it's an active or inactive user, or if it's a full or limited user, you can go ahead and set this up here. Okay. The company access is where we go next. So one of the things I would like for you guys to note, oh, and if you have classes, if you're still using user classes for whatever reason, you can assign them here. We don't have any set up. Okay. But what I want you to notice is these are all the same things that you can do in Dynamics GP if you go to the user window and then the user company window and then the user access window or whatever those windows are called nowadays. But remember, in GP you have to go to 3 different windows. You have to enter that system password 3 different times. This is all done in one consolidated area here, and you have that additional ability to go ahead and configure it as a Windows account. Okay. So here in the company access window, we can determine what companies the user should have access to. If you have multiple GP companies, you will see them all here. We do give you a select all and an unselect all button, so you can grant access. And every time you do that, it's going to ask if you'd like to add a note. I'm not going to in this instance, but again, because it is a self-auditing tool, we can go ahead and add notes. You can turn off this tracking if you'd like. If you don't need to track anything, you don't need to put any notes in or anything like that, you can turn that off. But we have it on because I always think it's a good idea when you're setting up users to be able to enter some notes in there and kind of keep track of what you're doing and why you're doing it. Okay. If you have multiple companies and you would like to set one as a default, you can. It is not a requirement. You don't need to. But what that does is that allows that user to go directly into that company each time they log in. They can still change companies once they're logged in, but it just kind of saves them a step. Okay. And then from here, we can assign the roles to the user. So if we have an alternate modified forms and reports profile will get assigned here, and then we can pick the roles. Now these roles are coming directly from your GP system. So if you have multiple GP roles that are, your own, they're not the out-of-the-box roles that you see here with the asterisks, but rather they're custom roles that have been built, you will see them all here. Okay, if you go into GP and add a new role, once you come into Config AD, that new role will appear here instantly. It's just reading from that role table within GP. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and make David Beckham the accounts payable clerk here, and I'm going to save this. And again, it's going to ask me for a note. Before that, I have my Assure tool installed, so I'm seeing this message about how many segregation of duties conflicts I'm going to generate. You can ignore this. This really has to do with that segregation of duties tool that we have installed. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and proceed with assigning the selected role. And here I can say, David Beckham has been hired as the new AP clerk starting. Okay, and so we can hit save. And so now, all of that tracking that's been done, under reports, we have the history tracking report, and we can see all of the changes that we've been making. So here we can see that the user was created. We can see the company that was granted, and here's the company name. We can see that profile being changed, that default forms and reports profile has been granted here, and then the security role has been granted. So we can see here with the notes that I've put in, these are users that are being deleted, so we can see this information. So here's Cedric being deleted, and then he's being added again, and this was Solberg doing this, whereas this is myself doing this, etc. So you have all of this tracking information. This can even be exported into Excel. So this is some of the auditing features that we have available for creating a new user. Okay. Now, before I get into the additional features of the product, we talked a little bit about this is setting up a brand new user, somebody that's never had GP access before. However, I'm sure that many of you already have all your GP users set up, and so you want them to be able to have that single sign-on access or single sign-on password required. You want to have them be able to use their Windows authentication, but you don't necessarily want to create a brand new user for them. You don't have to. Okay. The way that this works is if we go here to Anthony Rizzo, Anthony Rizzo is actually already a GP user. So when I click on Configure Dynamics User here and I go ahead and connect to GP, what happens is our tool does a search on the Windows ID and tries to find an exact match in the existing GP IDs, okay, the ones that are already set up. And if it finds an exact match, so if it finds a GP user ID that's called Tony as well, then what happens is it looks like everything is set up, but the login type says not associated. So what that means is that it found a GP user ID, and these are all the GP user IDs available, called Tony. It just hasn't made the association yet. It wants to make sure that it should, and it needs a person, it needs the administrator to make that final association to say, yes, Windows user ID Tony is indeed GP user ID Tony. They are one and the same. We would like to associate them, okay? And the only thing that we have to do to associate them is under the user ID field here in the upper left, we just click the checkbox. That will confirm, are you sure you would like to associate Windows user ID Tony with Dynamics GP user ID Tony? We say yes. And now the only thing that we have to do is change the login type. It defaults to standard. That's just how we have our configuration file set up. You can actually have it default to single sign-on or single sign-on password required, whichever you're going to be using more often. But I'm going to go ahead and change it. So Tony should be single sign-on. Okay? But the companies have been copied over. The roles that he has access to have been copied over. Actually, Tony didn't have any access in GP, but we'll see another user that actually did, and you'll see how it gets copied over. So we can actually go ahead and give him access if we'd like to, etc. So we have that ability to go ahead and make those associations with existing users. Now, some of you are saying, okay, that's great, but my Windows user IDs don't necessarily match my GP user IDs. Maybe my Windows user IDs are first initial last name, and maybe my GP user IDs are first names or something else. That's fine, not an issue. I'll show you another example. So Shajbin Banu here is actually known to the entire organization as Remy. That's his nickname, that's what everybody calls him. And so when he was set up as a GP user, okay, his user ID was actually set up as Remy. So now here, what it's trying to do is it's trying to find an exact match on Shajbin, and it's not finding it. So everything is grayed out. It looks like the user's not set up at all, etc. So what we want to do is we just want to make the association to the correct user ID. So it didn't find it automatically, but we can do that association manually. We're just going to scroll down until we find his user ID, and here it is. It's Remy. And we're going to go ahead and make this association. And so it's going to confirm, do we want to associate Windows user ID Shajbin with Dynamics GP user ID Remy? We're going to say yes. And now that we've done that, again, the login type is the only thing that we need to set. So we'll set him to single sign-on. And the company access, oh, sorry, we have to say the changes. The company access is already there. The roles that he has selected are already there. So we can go ahead and see that information right away, okay? So we have that information coming up. So we don't have to do anything special for the users that already exist aside from making that association. Now, the additional features of the tool are as follows. Under File Options, we go ahead and we have the ability to have this disable delete feature enabled. What this feature is it allows you to go ahead and if you disable or delete a user in Active Directory, it automatically disables or deletes the user in GP. Now, what do we mean by that? So if a user is disabled in Active Directory, maybe they're going out on a leave or something like that, then it will make the user in GP inactive if you are on GP 2013 or higher. If you're on GP 2010 or lower, the inactive functionality is actually not introduced yet. So what it does is it actually leaves the user ID created, but it removes access to companies and roles. Okay? If you delete the user in Active Directory. The user is no longer with the organization. Then you have the choice of how you want that handled in GP. Do you want them disabled or deleted? The most common choice is to delete. Auditors don't like what we consider orphaned users, users that are no longer with the organization but still have a login. Okay, but if you need to have them set to disable for any reason, you can absolutely do that. The next feature is the auto logout feature. As of right now, GP does not have any auto logout functionality. You log into GP, you're logged in for perpetuity. Okay, so what happens a lot of times for clients that are deploying via a thin client, terminal services, Citrix, etc., users, and I'm to blame, I do the same thing all the time. We don't like to go to File, Exit for some reason. We like to click the red X in the upper right-hand corner. Well, when you're on a thin client, what happens when you do that is you actually are not closing anything. You're just disconnecting your session. So you're still logged into GP. You're using up a GP license. Okay, so now we have clients that run into the issue where people are trying to log in and all their licenses are being used, and then somebody has to go in and remove the activity and all of that kind of stuff. This will do this for you automatically. Okay, you can set the period of inactivity. 30 minutes is the minimum, but you can set it to whatever you would like. And then from here, you can, once you set your period of inactivity, it will do a couple things. It will monitor SQL processing and it will monitor database and table locks. And we do that because we don't want to log anybody out if they're in the middle of doing something. So for example, if you're running some sort of intensive process where the front end doesn't seem to be moving but the back end is definitely doing things like year-end close, or maybe you're using one of the professional services tools, one of the pistol tools that's kind of combining vendors or something. There's a lot of stuff going on in the background, but you might not necessarily see anything happening in the foreground. It will not log you out. It knows that you're processing things, and so you will stay logged in. Okay? You start entering a huge journal entry, 50, 60 lines. You're 35 lines in and you get called to your boss's office. He wants to have a 5-minute discussion. That 5-minute discussion turns into a 90-minute discussion because you start talking about other things in your golf game and what your kids did for summer vacation, et cetera, et cetera. It will not log you out because you haven't hit save or post or delete. Now, if you have hit save or post or delete on that journal entry before you walked away because you know that your boss's 5 minutes always turn into 90 minutes, then it will log you out. Okay, but we don't log you out if you have something open where the system is waiting for a response from you. If you just had an inquiry window open, you'd get logged out, okay, because the system's not waiting for you to do anything. And then the final feature, which is a lot of people's favorites, I actually love this, I think it's a great feature, is you can actually deploy GP security via Active Directory groups. Okay, and what we mean by this is just like we created a user here, we set up Remy, we set up David Beckham, we set up Anthony Rizzo, we gave them their access. We can actually configure security to an Active Directory group. And we can do that either in the ADUC itself. Okay, so we can right-click on a group here and have that menu item that says Configure Dynamics Profile. Or again, if we don't have access to the Active Directory Users and Computers console, we can do it from the Config AD desktop. So we can click on Active Directory Groups, we hit Find, it's going to return all of the groups just like it returns all of the users. We click Configure Dynamics Group, we connect, and now for this group we can set the login type, we can set what companies members of this group should have access to and what roles members of this group should have access to. Okay, once we configure this, a new user comes on board. Let's see. I think Patrick Palmer just joined us. Okay, so now he's going to be an AP clerk. I have one of two choices. I can go through and manually configure his access, or I can tell my network team, hey guys, throw Patrick Palmer in the AD group called AP clerk. So I go to add to a group. I select my AP clerk group. I check names. It's okay. He was added to that group, and in just about, I think the interval was about an hour. In about an hour, a service is going to run that's going to see that he's been added to that Active Directory group. His user ID will be created in GP. He will be given access to the company. He will be given access to the roles that were selected for that group. He will be set up as a GP user. I don't have to do another thing to him. Okay? So with that being said, a user can have access to multiple Active Directory groups. Okay? Group security does take precedence. What I mean by that is if a group has 5 roles and you add a bunch of people to that group, and now all of a sudden one of those people really shouldn't have access to one of those roles. They should only have access to 4 roles. You can't go into that user and open up their security and say, okay, here are the 5 roles they have access to. Here's the one that I need to remove. Remove it and hit save. Because what's going to happen? The next time that that service runs, it's going to start part of that group. It's going to compare the security that they have to the security of the group. It's going to add that role back to them. You need to remove them from the group and then remove that role from them, okay? Because the group security is always going to take precedence over individual security. So with that, that's actually going to go ahead and conclude the demo part of the webinar. And I'd love to take any questions that you might have based on anything that you've seen at all, either the discussion that we had prior to the demo or the actual product itself.
Thanks, Liz. We don't have any questions so far, but I think that goes over pretty well how Config AD operates. If you actually want to go maybe back to the presentation, we can put up our contact info on the screen.
Absolutely, we'll do that right now.
So if you have any questions now, please feel free to put them into the GoToWebinar interface. If you come up with questions later on, if you want to see more of any of the products that Fastpath sells, we can do that as well. We have our contact info on the screen, or for our clients, you can contact your account executive and we could set something up for sure. So I actually do have a question that just popped up. Okay, so Michael asks, can you show the SOX compliance reports showing users, roles, and company access?
I can show that very quickly, but what I can also do is set up a separate demo because I won't be able to show all of it in the few minutes that we have left, but I can show you a quick example if you don't mind. Kathleen, if I just really quickly, I'll throw this up.
Yeah.
We'll go ahead and we'll open what we call our GRC Studio, and I can show you a quick example of the types of reports that we have available. And in the meantime, if there's another question while this is loading, this is only going to take a second, but we can go ahead and see that. But if there aren't any other questions, I'm going to just bring this up. And Michael, if this is something that you are interested in, we can always set up a separate meeting. And this is true for anybody. If there's anything that you would like to see, we can set up a separate meeting so that you can see some of the additional functionality that we have, or even if you want to see a more in-depth demo on Config AD. I pretty much went over all of the features, but maybe you have someone else in your organization that you think would be interested. We can set up another demo at any time. So with Assure, the segregation of duties analysis, okay, we have a lot of different reports here right out of the box. You don't even have to log into GP that show what who the users are, what roles they have access to. We can see very quickly what users have access to under either form access or critical access. So here I actually have a group of forms called Audit, and we can see who has we can go ahead and see who has access to the different pieces of the system, and if we click on any one of these, we can see how they're getting access, what role is giving them access. But the biggest piece of the segregation of duties analysis tool is we've come up with a conflict listing. This conflict listing is extremely comprehensive. It covers general ledger, accounts payable, accounts receivable, inventory, sales order processing, purchase order processing, HR, and payroll. And what we've done is we've evaluated every potential piece of the system that could cause a risk. And so we've come up with this, for example, if you have access to create GL accounts and you have access to do journal entries, then the potential risk is you can maintain a fictitious account and create erroneous posting entries. Or if you can create a vendor and you can pay that vendor, that's another risk. So here, if you have vendor maintenance and select payable checks, you could potentially maintain vendor information and create a payment to that vendor without review, etc. So if we go ahead and we now look at the user conflict area and we pick a user, and we go ahead and we, I'll pick, let's see, Harshita Bansal here, and we click go. Based on the access that she has been granted, these are the potential conflicts that we have for her. And it just takes a second, but there's about 31 potential conflicts, okay, based on her access. So I can see exactly what she has access to that is causing these potential conflicts. So I can do a review here and make sure that her access is appropriate. If it is appropriate, I can start documenting my controls for these risks. And that's what you see here in the status column, where you see some that are new, approved, proposed. This is just my documentation of my mitigations. So this opens the mitigate window and I can see that. Okay. Any other questions? And again, Michael, if you would like to see that in more detail, we'd be more than happy to set up a separate demo where we can go over the entire tool.
That's all the questions I have right now. Liz and I will be on here for a few more minutes longer, so please feel free to put in any questions you may have. Again, if you think of anything later or you'd like to see a more in-depth demo or have any more questions for Liz, just feel free to contact TGO. Okay, so I'm going to close off the presentation here. I just want to thank everybody for joining us this afternoon. And again, thank you for coming out again, or for your time. And if you have any questions, please feel free to contact TGO. Have a good day.